Hello there, hope you're doing great. It's time for us to continue with our concepts on JavaScript. So, in this session, we'll be focusing on events in JavaScript. So, what are events? Events are nothing but a function that executes when the user interacts with the web page or when the browser does something for us. I will give you a very simple example. For instance, when the user clicks on a button, you want to generate a certain response to the user. So you'll be just calling a function and you'll be generating this response. So what are events? We can think of events to be dynamic responses for certain actions that happen on your web page. Let's start with a very basic simple example for an event. So let's start with an HTML page, and the discussion for today's topic is events in JavaScript. So again, we have so many events. We have browser related events, we have user related events. So we have different categories of events available. We are just going to have an introduction to events in JavaScript. We will write some small routines and then we'll see how these routines are called when a user interacts with a web page. So we'll have a div element in our web page, and we'll have an ID for this div element. Let's say ID is D1. We can ask the user, hello user. Okay, we'll give that in caps so that the user is not offended. Hello user, can you move your mouse over here? So it's like we are asking the user to move his mouse over the division, and when the user does that, we need to change the color of this division. So how we can perform that is we should call this event like onMouseOver. So this is the event we are using, and once when the user moves his mouse over this division, we should just call a function. That's it. So we'll call change background function. So this is a function in JavaScript which we are going to write now. So what is the concept here? When the user moves his mouse over this particular div element, a function will be called and that function will generate the response. So here we'll write our script, JavaScript, and the function that we are going to have here is change background. So this is the function that will be executing. So what we are going to do here is access the element. It's document.getElement by ID. The ID for a div is D1. So we'll give D1 and we'll apply some style here. Style.background is equal to, we'll have the background color changing to aqua. So that's it. A very simple event here. See, when the user moves his mouse over the div, the background color for the div should change. And how we are changing that? We are using onMouseOver event, and this routine gets executed when the user moves his mouse over. So let's check. So you're able to see to the right hand side the output, right? When the user moves his mouse over, you're able to see that background color getting applied to the div element. So this is a very simple event handler that we have seen on onMouseOver. And you have a lot of such events. When you're working with events, how will you know all the events? When you just type on and then you get a list of all the events. So I told you the list is very huge. You can just learn things on your own by writing some routines and understanding how these events work. Let's move on to the next event, onKeyDown. Say when the user presses a key on the keyboard, there should be some response generated. Let's take the body section, onKeyDown. So this is the event. And what we are going to do here is we'll maybe change the font color, change font color. So this is the function that's going to execute when the user presses a key, and that will be applied to the font in the body section. So we'll have some text here. Hello, this is some text we are writing. Now what we'll do is we'll just write this function. So we will write this function. It is a function. Change font color is the function which will be called. And here we'll just access the body document.body.style the font color, we call that to be color, and we'll change it to red. Once when the user presses a key down, the font color for the text inside the body should be turning red. So that is the concept here. Let's refresh and let's try pressing a key. Let me press a key down on my keyboard. So there you're able to see the output. For the text that is present within the body section, the color that is being applied is red. So you're able to see the output to the right. So one of the events is when the user presses the key down, the text within the body will be getting the color red. And the next event we have coded is when the user moves his mouse over the div D1. Let me move it. What's happening now? The background color for the div is changing to aqua. So here is this function that changes the background color to aqua for a div, and here is this function that applies the font color to be red when we press a key down on the keyboard. So I hope now you've got some understanding of how to use events in JavaScript. Let's take a few more events before we wind up. We'll be talking about onScroll, onPaste, onClick, onSubmit. So we'll be looking at some more events like this. Let's start with this particular event onScroll. Now let's take a look at this event onScroll. Let me delete all the other events so that we'll just focus on one event for now. Let me delete all the other things that we have done for our previous events. Now we'll have a div element and we'll have the ID for div to be D1. And within this div, we are going to have some dummy text. I'm just going to generate some dummy text here. So this is the div. Now let us apply some style to our div. Let's have some styling here. So here I'm going to have this ID, access the element using the ID, and apply some height to be some 200 pixels for my division, and width to be some 200 pixels for my division. Let's have a background color also for our div. So background color to be my famous color aqua. Okay, so this is the div element we have. And what is the event we are going to have here is onScroll. Say onScroll is the event. onScroll, what's going to happen is the color for the text within the div will be changing to some other color. Say onScroll, we will call this function change font color. So that's the method call. Let's write the script for that method. Let's write the JavaScript code. So the function here we are using is change font color. And how is that you're going to change the font color? You call document.getElementById, and the ID for the div is D1 dot style dot color. So the font color we are going to change it as red. So this is the div element, and onScroll will be changing the font color to red, and we'll also have the scroll enabled, overflow scroll. Okay. So what is that we are trying to do here, or what is that we are trying to understand here is we have a div element with some scroll enabled, and height and width for the div is 200 pixels with a background color of aqua. Now the event we are trying to understand is onScroll. When we are scrolling, what should happen is this function will be called, and then the color for the text within the div will be converted to red. Let's check whether that happens. When I scrolled, you were able to see the output, right? The color for the text within the div got changed to red. So this is one of the events. So this event got triggered by an user action. I hope you were able to follow onScroll. Let's focus on one more simple event, onPaste. Say when the user pastes some text inside a text area, then a message should be generated for the user. So that is our next event, that is onPaste. Let's see how that one works. So for this, let me delete this entire thing. I'm going to go with the text area. Now let's take a look at this demo for onPaste event. So let's go with a simple web page. The title can be events in JavaScript. And what we'll do is we'll have a label for a text area. Label, we'll say it's input text. So let's say enter your text, or else we'll say paste your text. Paste your text. And this is a text area. So let's have a text area here. A name, let's say test1. Let's give some name and ID. ID can be test1 too. Number of calls 30, rows 10. And the event that we are going to call here is onPaste. onPaste, we'll call this function display message. So this is the function that will be executed when the user pastes some text inside the text area. Let's write the script for our function. So it's script. And what is the function? Function is display message. Display message is the function. And what we are going to do here is we'll just write document.write. We'll write a message to the user saying you have pasted some text. So that's it. What we have done here, created a simple text area, and when the user pastes some text, we are identifying that using this event onPaste, and we are calling this method. So this method is going to execute and display the message you have pasted some text. Say let me copy some text and let's refresh this. Let's submit. So once when I pasted the text, you are able to see the output. You have pasted some text. So this event onPaste will help us identify whether the user has pasted some text or pasted some content. So we have looked at some of the events like onMouseover, onKeyDown, onScroll, onPaste. I hope you will be able to explore the other events on your own with this kind of an input. Now let us take a look at another very important event, onClick. So when the user clicks a button, there should be some kind of response that is generated. So it's again, when the user clicks a button, we are going to call a function and execute a response for the user. So let's go with onClick event. So let's have this div, and we'll have this ID D1. Input button. Value, we can say it's submit. So now when the user clicks on this button, there should be a response that is generated. Maybe we'll populate some inner HTML for a div. So this is onClick. When the user clicks this button, what we are going to do is change content is the function we are going to call. And our HTML code is done. Let's write the script. Let's write the script here. So the function we are going to use is change content. And what content we are going to change? We are going to add some inner HTML to our div element. So we'll perform document.getElement by ID. We'll access the div element using the ID dot inner HTML. We'll say, hey there, it works. That's it. So when the user clicks the button, the inner HTML for the div should be populated with the text, hey there, it works. So that is the onClick event. Let's check whether it works. Let me submit. So you're able to see here, this div element had this text getting populated in it. And that's because we were calling this function using the onClick event. So when you're going to use onClick event, when the user clicks a button, say there's a button click that should happen. And when the user clicks, a certain event should be generated and a response should be given to the user. Then you can go with onClick event. I hope you're able to follow onClick. The next event, very important event that we're going to take a look at, is onSubmit. So onSubmit comes into place when the user submits data using a HTML form. So when the user submits it, you need to perform certain validation on the input, and you'll be submitting the data to the web server. So here we're going to see what is the use of onSubmit event with respect to submission of data using a form. Let's go with that. Let me delete everything here. Let's start with a simple web page again. And we'll say validating form submissions using event. And what is that we're going to perform here is we are going to have a very simple form. In this form, we are going to get the username, and then we'll be validating the username when the user submits the form. So whenever you're working with forms, there are certain fields that are very important. One is the action. The action is on submission of the form, what is the resource that is being requested from the server. So here our action is going to be the same form, that is exercise.html. So we're going to stay in the same page because you're not submitting anything to the server. We are not started our server-side scripting so far. So our action is going to be submit the data and be on the same page. So the action attribute tells us what is the resource we are requesting from the server on submission of the data. Next key thing is method. So this is the kind of method which we're going to use, whether it is post or get or put or delete. So this is the HTTP method that we are going to use while you're submitting data. So when you're submitting data to the server, always use post. And next comes the event onSubmit. So when the user submits the form, what kind of JavaScript function should be called in to validate the data? So here onSubmit, we have to call this function, say we'll call return validate. So return validate. So validate is the JavaScript function that will be called when the user submits the form to validate the information submitted by the user. So you may ask me why we should use return validate. Validate will be a Boolean method. It will return true or false. And you should follow this standard, return validate, so that your event finally gets the output, whether it is true or false after the validation. If you're not going to use return, then the data will be submitted to the server irrespective of the results that you get out of the validation. So we'll see all these things after we complete the exercise. Let's go forward. Let's complete the HTML form. So what is that we are going to have in this form is we'll have a label and that says username. We are going to ask the user to enter his username, enter your username. And we'll have this input type to be text. It's required. And we'll also have an ID. ID is username. We'll also have a name field, that is username. So we're going to have a label, an input type, and then a submit button. We'll have a value for submit, that is submit. And we'll also have a name for submit. Name is equal to submit. So this is a form. You're able to see the form to the right hand side. We have a label here, then the text field where the user will enter his username and then submit. So what is that we are going to check here? Say if the user enters a username which is less than 5 characters in length, we are going to just give a message back to the user. We are going to just say you should enter something that is at least 5 characters in length. So that is the check we are going to make. We'll see how to get the data from the form in our script. So let's go to the script. So the function we are going to use here is function is validate. So this is the function and it's a Boolean method. It will return either true or false. It will return true if the user enters something that is 5 or more than 5 characters in length of username. And it will return a false if the user is entering something invalid that is a username less than 5 characters in length. So first of all, how to get the value entered by the user in your JavaScript code. So user enters something here, and this we should get it in our JavaScript code. How to get that? For that, we are going to use the ID document.getElement by ID dot value. So we're going to use this ID, and when we say dot value, we'll be able to get whatever input the user is entering. So I'll just use this constant username is equal to document.getElement by ID. What is the ID for the text box? That is username, and dot value will fetch the value entered by the user. Now this is the username that's coming in, and we can perform a simple check. If username dot length is less than 5, so we're just using a string handling property here. So if the length is less than 5, we can just perform document dot write username should be at least 5 characters in length. A very simple check. Else we can perform document.write hello there, you're doing great. Some message we'll give. So what is our method performing here? Very simple. We are getting the username entered by the user, and we are checking whether its length is less than 5. If it's less than 5, we are alerting the user with some error message, or else we'll say hello there, you're doing great. And there's one more thing which I have forgotten. This is like a validate method, which is a Boolean method. So whenever the user enters something wrong, we have to return false. So what is the meaning of this? When I return false, the data will not be submitted to the server. So onSubmit will get false. So it's going to stay here. The data will not be proceeding with the server side request. So we'll return false. If the user enters something fine, then we can return true. Since we have not written any server side script here, this is going to take us nowhere. Let's take the invalid situation here. That is, if the user enters, say, SAT as the input, which is less than 5 characters, when he submits, username should be at least 5 characters in length. So you're able to generate this message. And how this message was generated? That's when the user submits. On submit, there is a return validate. So validate validates the input, checks if it is less than 5 characters. If it is less than 5 characters, throws the message and returns false. False in the sense data will not be submitted to the server. If it is true, then the data gets submitted to the server. So we'll be looking at how data gets submitted to the server while you're working with PHP scripts. If you want to test this specific condition, we can just return false. See, I am returning false here. It is intentionally done to retain or to avoid submission to server side scripts. Since we have not written anything so far, we have not written the server side script. That's the meaning here. So let's just check. If the user enters, say, anything that is greater than 5 characters, let me enter my name. So now, hello there, you're doing great. So after this, we are returning false so that we stay on the same page. If you're not returning false, you'll be able to see that it's just trying to request something from the server, which is not there, and then it's going to be an error for you. So if you really want to know what happens after you return true here, you have to wait for us to complete PHP and writing some server-side scripts so that we understand the entire flow. Is that fine? So that's how you use onSubmit. So there's always this question, why we use onClick and why we use onSubmit. What is the difference between them? See, when you have an isolated button and when you click it, you want some kind of events to be generated and response to be given to the user, then you can go with onClick. But when you're working with form data, you have to use onSubmit. And when the user submits it, you can validate the information. And if the valid info is there, you can submit the data to the server. If the information is not valid, you have to return a false. And you should ask the user to enter the info again. So with that, we'll be winding off our very short discussion on event handling in JavaScript. I'm again telling you it's a very short discussion because we have discussed a very few events. And with this input, I believe that you'll be able to explore the other events in JavaScript. So that's it for now. If you have any questions, you can leave a comments below, and thank you all for listening. Take care.